Well, hey people, we're back at it. We're going to talk about the 17th century. And let's look at some flamboyant pictures. But first, we're going to talk about the historical perspective. And at this time, the European powers were France, England, and Spain. So we're going to talk about those ruling classes and a little bit of the historic, economic, and political background at that time. First, we're going to start with, so we left the Renaissance in our last module, and this period is known as the Baroque and Rococo period. So you may have heard those words, but not known the time that it referred to. So that's what we're going to talk about first. So, like I said at the top, France, England, and Spain were the ruling European powers in this time, and the fashion of this era originated in those three countries. But there were some other countries, on the Italian peninsula, which also are in the mix, and they adopted some of these prevailing styles. So in terms of Baroque and Rococo, Baroque was a term that was used in France, and it was really dominated by the figure of Louis XIV. And you see this image here of him in his royal robes, and they really just could not be more fabulous. I love it so much with the embroidery and all of the fur and adornment and the wig. It's fabulous. Because of all the political struggles, the King of France actually moved out of Paris and moved the seat of power to the enormous palace that we know as Versailles. The Palace of Versailles became a symbol of glory and majesty in this period, but it also played a role with being the seat of an absolute monarch. So the Palace of Versailles actually was a palace of contradiction. So noblemen at Versailles either lived at the palace in royal apartments, like in the actual building, or they lived in squalid loungings in the village that surrounds Versailles. And to maintain appearances, noblemen needed, expensive, varied wardrobes. So they actually spent more of their clothes than their living conditions. Interestingly enough, this keeping up of appearances actually worked to Louis XIV's advantage. Nobles competed to participate in these complicated rituals. That how close could you get to the king? So could you be there to help him get dressed in the morning or prepare for bed at night? And he kept his noblemen so busy waiting on him hand and foot that they didn't even have time to plot against him. So the reign of Louis XIV really just not only set the style in France, but it set the style for what an absolute monarch looked like, a style that was copied throughout Europe, in addition to his fashion style, which was copied throughout the monarchies of the other countries around the world. So, like I said, the figure of Louis XIV dominated, but there was a political struggle happening in France at the time. So, at the death of Louis XIV, there was a struggle after his reign of 72 years of who was going to be in charge, and members of the nobility fell in and out of favor at this point in time. While the French king grew more powerful, across the English Channel, the English weren't in such good shape. So at this point, James, the cousin of Queen Elizabeth, the fourth son of Mary, Queen of Scots, was reigning, and there was a radical Protestant faction that was developing. You may know James I. He is more well known for his translation of the Bible. So this is the King James that the King James Bible is named after. This faction, called the Puritans, wanted to, purify the Church of England from whatever remnants that were left over from the Roman Church. We talked about that a couple of lectures earlier, and we know these Puritans. These Puritans eventually became the Pilgrims that came to settle and establish the United States. English monarchs believed they had a God-given right to the throne and to rule over the English people. And eventually, the English monarchs and the Parliament reached a showdown over money and religion. So, while the Puritans wanted to conform the practices of the Church of England, the monarch was more concerned with levying heavy taxes on the people. In 1649, the monarch at the time was Charles I. He was beheaded. The monarchy, I giggle, but he was beheaded. He didn't listen to what the people wanted. The monarchy was abolished and a republic was founded. The commander of the army, Oliver Cromwell, became what is known as a protectorate, which was just a form of military dictatorship. Oliver Cromwell didn't last long. He only lasted until 1659 when he died, and by 1660, the son of Charles I, who had taken refuge in France, was returned to the monarchy, and upon his return, he brought a taste for French style back to the English court. So this is the first time that we can include the North Americans in this historical perspective. But early American colonists, those Puritans, those settlers of New England, you would expect to find a population with little interest in fashion, and oftentimes when we think of them as kind of being threadbare or living under primitive conditions, and that is not the case. An invoice of English goods shipped to New England around 1690 included many fashionable accessories and fabrics for making both men's and women's garments. And religious and secular leaders didn't always approve of such what they called fancies. And there actually were sumptuary laws that were passed prohibiting what men and women could wear. And last, since we were talking about the major powers in Europe, is Spain. And really in the 17th century, Spain was on the decline. And although it had been a fashion leader in Western Europe during the Renaissance period, it really was lagging behind, thrown in those other countries. And because of its close ties to still being a Catholic country, it tended to be more conservative than the other countries. Okay, that's where we're going to leave the history for now. When we dive into some of the textile production and clothing and looking at all the awesome pictures, we will get more details.